So, welcome to 801 Labs. Tonight we are presented with Chad, who's talking on Terraform Packer on Proxmox. We're excited to have him here. Chad is a real Chad. He's been a Chad his whole life. Anyway, thank you for coming to 801 Labs. If you enjoy these presentations and you enjoy what we do here, please consider donating. Everything we do is based off of donations. We are a 501c3 charity, so any donations are tax write-off. The more people that donate, the more cool things we can do, and the longer we can exist. And we usually exist year by year and donation by donation, so please consider donating. And without further ado, here is Chad.
All right. So, as Nemus has already introduced me, I'm Chad Wayment. I'm the 801 Lab server officer. I also go by the handle Clark Kent on Discord. Today, like they said, we're going to be talking about Terraform and Packer and automating the provisioning of VMs on Proxmox using those tools. So a little bit about me. This is kind of my background. Actually, that is a little incorrect, but I was actually on IT support, but at America First Credit Union was my very first IT tech job, and then following that, I moved over to a support engineer role over at Spillman Technologies, and then within Spillman, I moved over to a sysadmin's position, doing mostly Windows systems administration, also a little Linux, I wore a lot of hats there. It was kind of an interesting job. And then after we were acquired by Motorola, I moved over to become a cloud engineer on their cloud team. And I started provisioning systems in Azure. Didn't stay there for too long. I wasn't all about really big corps. So I moved over to a startup called SureLink we do like accounting software for like workflow, and I kind of just wear all the hats there. It is what it is. There's only 40 employees, so it's kind of a fun gig. So that's a little bit about me. First of all, we'll talk a little bit about Packer. So Packer is like one of the best tools I'm aware of anyway for creating a golden image on any type of cloud infrastructure you can possibly think of. If you're not going to containerize it, I would recommend using Packer. It supports literally every single cloud service, pretty much every virtualization platform out there. They have auto provisioners for support for most of your major configuration management tools: SaltStack, Chef, Puppet, Ansible. And then there's also even more that's maintained by the community. If you go to packer.io plugins, you can check that out, and they've got all sorts of cool stuff there. We're going to go ahead and build a quick image and kind of get you guys showing what you can do with it. So Packer kind of has a cool syntax in that they use a lot of the same stuff as Docker. If you want to just build something, you can just say Packer build and then whatever directory you're working with, assuming, of course, that you've already written your code to support that. So we're going to go ahead and get started with the build, and I'll just kind of let you guys see what's going on and explain what's happening as we do it. So all right, so it's starting to provision the server. All right, so you'll notice that it's doing a whole bunch of stuff for you, so you don't have to type in a single thing while it provisions the server. So this is just a base ISO that you can just download, the latest server ISO for Ubuntu, and you'll notice that it did a whole bunch of stuff to start automating the provisioning of the server. And so what it's doing behind the scenes is it's executing this boot command right here. And so what Packer lets you do is it allows you to automate the provisioning of any type of golden image by letting you send custom commands to your virtualization platform, and then execute those commands in an automated way without having to support, or, go in and do it manually yourself. So you can automate the entire provisioning of everything, including provisioning the server via user data, which is exactly what this is doing. So what I've written my Packer code to do here is I have it consume some variables that you can just put in a variables.packer.htcl file. And you'll notice that even though there's you can set default for a lot of things, some things I'm not setting a default for, and that's usually things that I don't want to go into my repository. So things like secrets, your passwords, SSH keys, you don't really want those to end up in your repository. So for your local dev, what you're going to be doing is instead putting it into a we don't want the actual one. The auto. I'll explain the auto thing here in just a little bit. But where's the example? We'll just. It is local.packervars right there. All right, so basically I'm just passing these things in. So what you can do is you can change what is happening based on which variables you want to use for which environment by just passing in a different variables file, packervars.htcl file, and this overrides your defaults so that when you're provisioning systems, it allows you to override the default settings, so you can deploy to different environments and automate the provisioning of this particular file using a CI/CD tool like GitLab or Travis CI, Circle CI, whatever. And then you can build and pass in the environment variables that you want to pass to your Packer script, so that it sets up whatever you need for that specific environment. So if you want to use different things if you want to have a different provisioning for your QA versus your prod, for instance, you can do it by using these variable files. So anyway, enough about that. So that's how I'm pulling all of these variables in. Okay, so you can just pass in anything that you want to be changed in as a variable, and then it will consume it when you execute the build script. So enough about that right now. So there are a few things that you need to know if you're going to be using user data for your provisioning. So right here I'm using this IP equals DHCP auto install no cloud seed from. What this is doing is when this gets passed in within that first 5 seconds of the boot via Packer, it's saying go ahead and negotiate with DHCP, grab an IP address. We're going to, instead of using the base install with Ubuntu where you have to go in and type in all the things you want to configure your image, instead I want you to use auto install. And then what we're going to do is we're going to seed it from the machine you're running it from. And so this right here is going to grab your machine's IP address and your port, and then it's going to set up a little web server that you can pass in your user data and your what's the other one? It's the metadata. Thank you. So then it serves those up into a little HTTP server. So then when your image is provisioning, it's going to grab those files for you from your HTTP server, and it's going to start using those to use the user data files to provision the image. So I just kind of have a basic one here that sets up an Ubuntu user, sets up a static IP. Unfortunately, we don't have we don't have auto registration with our DHCP server yet, so we've got to use static IPs here, and I'll explain why that creates problems later. But ideally, you just set DHCP4 to true, and then you can, in your Packer script, you're just, instead of using whatever your, let's see, where is that? Oh yeah, instead of using your SSH host as your static IP that you've passed in as a variable, what you're going to do is just set it up as the host name, and then it'll SSH into it when it does this part of the provisioning for you. So right now it's still going through the user data portion. It looks like right now it's stuck on the unattended upgrade, so it's doing that part right now for you. So we'll talk about the next part after it's done with this step right here. So after it's done provisioning the server using the user data information, what it's going to do is it's going to SSH in the machine, and it's going to run all these commands for you. And what this does is, fairly obvious. First, it's going to update, check in, see if there's any updates. It's going to upgrade the server. It's going to install curl wget, and then it's going to make a few changes to Grub so that you can use Proxmox's user data and cloud init to provision any further servers that you create with Terraform. And so that's an important part that you have to do if you want to be able to use the cloud init feature of Proxmox. And so that's what all these steps right here are doing. And then after that, we're going to add a few things by SSHing into the Proxmox server itself and making a couple of changes so we can set up our own user data or cloud init template for Proxmox. And so that will just basically fill in all these attributes once it's done and it's finished creating the image for you and turned it into a template for you. And the way that it's doing all this is via Proxmox's API. So the guys who wrote this plugin, they basically just took Proxmox's API and then just used Packer's standard format to translate all of your Packer code into what it's actually doing on the back end via Proxmox's API. And so in order to pull that plugin, you have to make sure you include this portion right here. And it will pull the plugin when you run Packer init. So you just run Packer init to pull that. And then it would pull the plugin for you if you haven't already done it, and then you'll basically be good to go. So okay, now it's done with that portion. So now it's going to go where it's now going to start executing the remote remote execute portion of the code. So there it starts. So now we've started running apt update and apt upgrade. So there's a few other things that you kind of want to be leery about, of like why you might do things using the remote exec feature in Packer versus using something like user data. These are just some of the findings I've had. So any packages that you might want to provision via the user data file, if it has a very complex chain of prerequisites for that package, there's a lot of potential for failure. And so I found that you want to do like just kind of simpler packages. You don't want to do something that has a whole bunch of prerequisites, because those tend to fail a lot at the user data when it's provisioning via Cloud Init. Also keep things simple with your sed commands and things like that. If you're messing with any symbols like this, like a colon, it sometimes interprets that as part of the YAML code, and it'll cause the Cloud Init portion to fail as well. So that's just some things to be wary of, and when you're writing like your echo commands or your sed commands or anything like that, because otherwise you can run into issues like that. And I'll get into this a little bit. Ideally, you do this, like I said, if you have DHCP with auto DNS name registration. The reason why is after you've built the golden image, anything you build off of that image is going to have that same IP address. So if you try to provision from that server with a static IP address and it's not negotiating DHCP, then you're not going to be able. Then you're going to have to go in and manually either put in some hack to go in and change the IP address for you, which is what I've attempted to do, or you can go in or you're going to have to go in and manually change the IP address by running NetPlan. So if you use user data, it's going to configure your IP address via NetPlan. I'm not sure what everyone's familiarity with Ubuntu is here, but that's kind of how that's what it's going to do with Cloud Init. And Cloud Init is just a good way to kind of auto provision servers via Packer or with Proxmox in general. It's one of the kind of cooler features that it offers with you. Any questions so far before I keep going further into this from Discord or anyone else?
There's nothing on Discord, so.
I just want to confirm, you can just like apt install Packer, or is there something special you need to do like Docker?
So that's a very good question. So you can come here just to install Packer. They've got a getting starting guide that you can go through. They do have different ways of doing it. So it is kind of like Docker, where they have their own apt repository. So it's not like something that's in the official Ubuntu repositories or Red Hats or anything like that. But you can add their key and then add their repository that way.
Okay. So
And that's the easiest way.
slightly tricky, but not hard.
No, it's copy paste commands and you're done.
Isn't that all programming?
How much Stack Overflow did you use?
Honestly, not too much. I actually use Packer a lot in cloud environments, and I will be perfectly honest, it does cloud provisioning way better. And the reason why is because the plugin I used, the plugins that I've used for Proxmox are all community-based. HashiCorp supports AWS. It supports, and both Packer and Terraform are HashiCorp products, by the way, but they support cloud environments really well. So everything that you provision on Terraform or Packer in AWS or Azure or DigitalOcean or anything, at least I know, especially with AWS, it works really well and it works every time. Things like Proxmox, there's some jitteriness and some things you have to think about and work around, and it's community based and the documentation is clear, and so you have to kind of like hack at it till you make it work. That's just kind of the nature of the beast, I think. So anyway, we've got a working image. You can now see that we've got the Cloud Init settings here. We've got the IP address. We've got the hardware. Everything's all provisioned to what we want. So now we can go ahead and we can start talking a little bit about Terraform. So Terraform is what allows you to actually provision your infrastructure. And its capability is really amazing, unlike your cloud environments. You can provision basically everything in the cloud. So you can set up your NAT gateways, all of your routing rules, all of your security groups. So like everything can be done with Terraform. Your WAF, your literally everything. Here on Proxmox, it's community-based, so there's certain things that you're going to be a lot more limited on what you're capable of doing, but it does have some cool features here. So let's look at what we can do here. So we'll talk a little bit about our code before we go through it and start provisioning things. So right here, I basically just have a single resource that we're provisioning, and what we're doing is provisioning all of our servers that we want based off of our golden image. And for your reference, I'm using this particular plugin, the Proxmox plugin from the Terraform registry. And so for background, for those of you that aren't familiar with Terraform has its own registry, just like Docker and many other tools out there, where you can build like your own providers and stuff like that and deploy them, and other people can use them. My findings with Terraform are kind of like what I said earlier. If it was written by HashiCorp, it's really good, has really, really good support. It works pretty much every time. If it's community-based, you kind of have to hack at it. It's going to be based on what the support is, whether or not they're still maintaining it, and that kind of stuff. So this one is the only one I really found that is still being maintained actively. But there are a few issues that, depending on your environment, you may run into issues that you'll just have to solve for. So let's talk a little bit about the code.
Can you full screen those? Because there's people on Discord who are going to be lost.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Let's look at the code this way. So hopefully that makes it a little bit easier to read. And I can even expand it a little bit farther. Okay, so what I've done here is I created an object that is a map of all of the parameters that I want to pass into my VM. And what I can do here is I can now loop through each object and provision each server based on the parameters that I pass to that individual server. So right here, we've got a couple of Ubuntu VMs that we're just going to provision, and we're just going to pass them through a for each loop, and then we're going to read what gets passed in from the variables file, and we're going to use the each.values to just to set the variables that we want from our object within our code. And this allows us to pull, to scale really, really quickly our infrastructure. So if you're wanting to build a whole bunch of servers and you want to configure all of them a little bit differently, this allows you to do it. And you're not having to manage the provisioning of each individual one nearly so much. Like Packer, and this is kind of what I like about HashiCorp, is they have a very standard HCL format code that you can use for setting up different ways of passing in your variables for different environments. So if you're setting up your CI/CD, you can pass in one environment variables file and it will set things up and provision it for your QA environment. And then if you want to do it slightly different for prod, you can do that. And then it keeps your code as dry as possible without having to do a whole lot of configuration and messing with it. And it really makes your code nice and clean and makes it easy to manage. So like the other one that I was showing, let's see, where's our example? There it is. So we've got an example, TFRs. This is how you can pass in anything that you don't want set as default in your variables file, and then you can override the default variables that way. And it'll ensure that you can keep your code dry, but also provision all of your infrastructure without, messing with too much of the infrastructure itself, or having to play too much with variables, or making messy code. So it just makes things a lot cleaner. All right, so let's go ahead and start provisioning our infrastructure. So there's a couple things that you need to know about Terraform. So it comes with its own suite of commands, kind of like Packer does. And if you're ever stuck on all the capabilities of it, I haven't gone over all of the capabilities at all, but you can always just run Terraform. I think it's -- help. There you go. So there's a bunch of different features of what Terraform will let you do. So the main things that you're probably going to be doing, especially if you're just using this in CI/CD, is you're going to be using a init to initialize your local Terraform, and what this lets you do is you can use it to switch between environments. You can use it to switch between, because what I typically do with Terraform is I have a different state file for every single environment, and using a script or Terraform init allows you to switch between your different environments so that you can manage the infrastructure on each of the different ones, on each of your different environments. So, okay. So then after you've initialized it, you're going to plan your infrastructure provisioning. So when you run the plan command, it's going to give you some information about what you're planning to provision. And it allows you to review the changes that are going to be made on your infrastructure so you can review it before you actually apply it. And the reason why this is important is what the state file does in Terraform. So when you run a plan, it creates a plan to provision your infrastructure. When you apply it, it sets up something called a state file, and the state file maintains the state between your actual current infrastructure and what's currently in your code. So when you run a plan, it's checking against the state file to see what's in your code, and then it's going to see what changes have been made and what it needs to do to make your code match your current existing infrastructure. So what I like about this versus things like Ansible and Salt and some other things that I've used in the past is it allows you to maintain the state of your code without having to explicitly destroy or destroy config or destroy infrastructure. It just does it based on what's currently in your code. And I really like that about it. But obviously there's a little risk in that, so you have to be careful about, what you've got in your code. So do it in QA for, do it in your local dev, then QA, and go throughout your different environments, or otherwise you're going to break everything. So something you need to be aware of with Terraform. All right, so let's see here. So now that we've made the plan, we can now go ahead and apply our plan, and it will provision the infrastructure. And one other thing that you should be aware of with most HashiCorp products and the way that they do their variables, if you ever say anything .auto, TFRs, it will automatically pass all those variables into your command without you having to pass it in as a parameter. You can also pass in variable files and variables by using the .bar file or the -bar flags, but I'm lazy and I hate typing, so I just set everything up in these local.auto.tfr files or local.auto.packervar files. It just makes things a lot cleaner and requires a lot less messing around with the CLI. All right, so now we can go watch and see as these servers get provisioned. talk a little more about that. Any other questions about Terraform specifically?
So you're using this with Packer and a full Ubuntu VM. Does it work with like LXCs and other things as well?
Yeah, so Terraform works with LXC. For Proxmox, it works with LXC as well. So if you're building out LXC containers, instead what you would build is a Proxmox LXC, and you just kind of follow these examples to provision any LXC containers you want to provision.
I figured it'd be similar, but wanted to confirm.
Right. So, anyway, it's going to, so now it is waiting for the servers to have SSH available so it can provision the servers. And it looks like it's done. So now you can see if the net plan applying portion worked, because sometimes it doesn't. And then if it didn't, then we won't be able to SSH into it. And in that situation, you would just have to go in, SSH into the box, and then fix the net plan apply. So you just do this. And anyway, if you've got, like I said, if you've got a DHCP with DNS registration, you won't have the IP conflict issues, and you won't have to deal with that at all. But really, that's it. Are there any other questions specifically? I know I kind of breezed through a lot of that information really fast, so.
Overview of what each tool does, starting with Packer up to Terraform. Which one would you use for what?
So Packer is a lot better for building like golden images, or if you're on cloud, AMIs, if you're familiar with what AMIs are. So AMIs are basically like the server image that you base all of your servers from. And so you can build your own AMIs using Packer, and it will let you use that as a base image to then provision the rest of your infrastructure.
Okay.
And so you would like create an AMI, and then you'd go and you could use either the console, or you can use Terraform, or you can use their, what is it, I don't remember the name of the AWS's CloudFormation, and you can provision the rest of your infrastructure that way.
Okay.
And then Azure has something very similar. Pretty much every cloud platform has something that's very similar to that.
Okay.
So yeah. Yeah, if there's nothing else, that's basically more or less the class. So thank you all for coming.